listeners, and welcome to A Geek Tragedy. I'm Stephen, known online as Plague Mantle for various reasons, and I am your host. I'd like to welcome to the pod the most erudite human and my best friend, Holly Properly. Not sure what you're doing, Holly Properly, but how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. My cat was just making an arse out of himself, so I was videoing it for posterity.
What was he doing?
Well, there is a large moth that is on the outside of the window. He is sat on the dining room table next to the window, batting at it repeatedly and making a lot of chirpy noises.
Trying to bring it into land, perhaps?
Maybe, but he will be staring at that window now probably until like next Thursday.
I would be if there was a moth out there.
Yeah, very
exciting. So you were videoing his posterior for posterity then?
Pretty much, yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Nice. And that voice you can hear is our very own salvage man and crafter par excellence, Mark Gaudry. Hello, Mark. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much, Stephen. Life potters along in a most amiable manner down here in Cornwall.
Ah, yes, of course. You've moved in the last 2 years, and I'd forgotten.
Yeah.
How's building things for the Spoop Festival going?
Pretty good. We had a weekend of doing builds for this interactive haunted waxworks that's happening in town in November, actually. So I was making a giant lobster, and we made a ghost. I know it's a haunted lobster. It's a big haunted lobster.
Not a lobster lawyer.
Things like that happen down in Cornwall.
Okay.
And ghost dogs and stuff.
Nice.
So, yeah, making stuff.
Well, behind the scenes, as ever, is our long-suffering producer, who shall be known as Kit, Airfix Kit, Aurora Kit, Biss Kit, Mr. Fix Kit. No, I don't know. Is that it?
Oh, I like Mr. Fix Kit. That's cool.
Really?
Meccano Kit, Connects Kit, Macrame Kit. We're scraping the bottom of the barrel here completely, but
Wiley Kit was a Thundercat.
Of course, Wiley Kit was a Thundercat.
And the small ones.
There was a tiny one at Fantasy Forest. Belonged to Lion-O.
Oh yeah, let's move on.
Ooh, yes. Anyway, Stephen, changing the subject. How are you?
Yeah, I am not too bad. A long day. It's a 4:30 a.m. start for me on Tuesdays, so getting to the pod, I'm always quite weary. But seeing you guys and getting on with storytelling is quite reinvigorating. So it's not a bad time of night. There we go. Anyway, here we are. And last week we were investigating the long history of Samhain, or Samhain, as we discussed it being called in Supernatural, ergo our only experience of it outside of England. That's right, isn't it? Maybe. Or Scooby-Doo, perhaps.
I don't know if they ever actually say it in Scooby-Doo.
In Scooby-Doo? Like that.
This is great.
Halloween!
Yes, and how that... we were talking about how Halloween has reinvented itself over the years, and has now got things like, now that's what I call Halloween, the soundtracks, and traditions of trying to drown oneself while we collect apples from a big tub of water.
I never understood that.
How does that come from? Why is that a thing?
Oh, let me look it up, because that's
Bobbing for apples. Oh, you know, what should we do this Halloween that's like kind of spooky?
Holly's like Ask Jeeves, isn't she?
Yes.
Yes, you are. Ask Holly.
Get Holly to Google a thing. So.
Yeah, pretty much. This is actually really interesting.
Oh.
So it's influenced by Samhain. So the tradition of bobbing for apples originated in ancient Celtic and Roman times, was influenced by the Celts' Samhain festival and the Romans' worship of Pomona.
We know what the Romans originally called Halloween.
They did not call it Margret. Stop saying that. They didn't
call it Margaret.
They did not call it Margret.
It's going to be a thing.
Oh, it's not going to be a thing.
Stop
trying to make fetch happen. The tradition of bopping for apples, bopping for apples.
That happened down the disco.
It's you and all your Margert talk. It's putting me off. The tradition of bobbing for apples is depicted in a drawing in the Luttrell Psalter, an illuminated manuscript from the 14th century. Bobbing for apples was originally a game of romance with several variations that had nothing to do with Halloween. For example, in one version, female party guests would bob for apples assigned to them by male guests. The number of tries it took to bite the apple was said to indicate how likely the two were to be together.
Right. Well,
it
I
was
have
like
to
a
say that I
courting
absolutely know
ritual,
more than I did when I
basically.
started. Anyway, this week, if we're done, we are going to tweak the nipples of terror and shave the hairy head of fear as we explore the things that we love and embrace at this time of year. What?
I don't want to tweak any nipples.
But they're the nipples of fear. But you're okay with shaving the shiny head of terror?
Sure. I just can't.
What about cupping the buttocks of fear?
Trombonic? No, I won't go that
No.
Put it down.
Anyway, so we explored how Halloween has changed. We explored how the party atmosphere that now live in compared to the cold Octobers that people lived through in the past in their Margret celebrations. And now we're going to explore how film has changed. And obviously, storytelling is something that is done around campfires or to keep warm and so forth. This time of year, it's fantastic. I wish Gary was here to tell us the long stories around the campfire and terrorize us as they would have done in the olden times. But film was kind of built for horror in many ways, particularly when it first came out and they could do all those kind of cool special effects that nobody could quite believe on the screen. So, Mark, if you could take us back to the late 1800s when people were first terrified by strange things on silver screens. So take us back
in time.
I asked you to sing a song. Just fucking tell us about film.
No, that was going back in time. Well, when was the first film that was ever considered to be a horror film produced? I hear you ask.
I thought you were actually asking. I was thinking.
Was it 1896?
Yeah, it was, because I gave you the notes.
You did.
Oh, I haven't. That's what I get for working for other people.
Although, if you have read the notes, Holly, you might be able to pronounce the name of this film better than I.
Where are these notes again?
I don't know where you've put them.
It's in our Facebook chat. It's in. Okay. It says Lee Majors do dibbles.
No, hang on.
No, it doesn't, does it?
Why is the $6 million man in here?
It does not say that at all. It says Le Manoir du Diable.
That's what I said.
Georges Méliès.
Georges Méliès.
Georges Méliès. The same director who gave us The Trip to the Moon, that famous image of the moon with a rocket stuck in its eye, which looks as though the moon is made out of custard. It was a 3-minute short, 1896, and although it wasn't really horror themed, it had all the elements of dancing skeletons and the devil and special effects, which were part of the experimentation that Mr. George was playing with the medium.
Well, what Mark, can you tell us that Lee Majors does Divils?
Le Manoir du Diable.
And what is that in English?
It's been translated as it's often called the Haunted Castle, I think, and
the House of the Devil.
It's the Devil's House,
and the Devil of the House of the Devil as well. Yeah, it goes under a couple of names, but that was its original.
It now.
Yeah, excellent, marvelous.
Okay. It's on YouTube.
That'll only take you 3 minutes. But probably the first proper horror films, although they still weren't called horror films, were silent in the 1920s, which is like the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and, of course, Nosferatu. Both silent films, but they were definitely intended to be scary films.
But this time though, wasn't it? It really was made for when film was discovered and they were like, well, let's make films. They must have been like people going, we could do so many terrifying things with this, because the idea of just pausing a film and taking someone off stage and then starting it up again, and people were like, what the fuck's happened here? Where did that guy just go? And I'm just watching this bat flapping around the screen, and clearly someone's just yoiking it across the front of the camera. It's tremendous stuff.
If you think about it, the very first, what I believe to be the very first showing of a film clip in a cinema was basically a horror film, because it was a train coming straight out the screen, and people ran out of the cinema because they thought this train was going to come into the audience, because they'd never seen anything like it before.
The other famous one was the tide coming, wasn't it? And people thought they were going to drown, and there was going to be water coming out the screen, and you're like, can you imagine being like this is amazing stuff.
No,
fear has been very much a part of the whole cinema evolution from pretty much year dot, which is kind of fascinating. But the first time an official horror film, which being officially referred to as a horror film, didn't come along until the 1930s with things like Frankenstein and The Mummy, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, things like that. Those were referred to specifically as horror films for the first time.
Go on, Beans.
Yes, Holly.
Which is weird, because Frankenstein is not considered to be a horror novel.
No, it's considered to be a sci-fi novel.
Is science fiction, because the majority of the processes that are gone through are scientific processes. It's science fiction. So there's a really interesting kind of almost like a little bit of a discrepancy there, because there's nothing overtly frightening about Frankenstein's monster in the novel, accepting his appearance. He is not an evil being. He is a completely blank being, deciding whether, he is somebody who is evil based on the way that other people treat him, or whether he is good based on his own internal morality, or whether he's neither of those things at all. There's and because of his outward appearance, that is what makes it a horror film. And I think that really speaks to how it's the same with things like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, right? You make someone ugly, or you make someone unappealing in their form or physique, and suddenly you don't have science fiction anymore, you've got horror.
Well, we'll get to Lon Chaney, the master of 1,000 faces, who was all about looking horrible. But, I mean, have you ever seen the original Frankenstein with Boris Karloff?
I think I have.
The way it's filmed is definitely they're laying on the dread and the horror and the darkness and the fear and the unnatural quality of the whole thing. I mean, you don't get many science fiction films where you get villagers charging a castle with pitchforks and burning torches.
No, you don't.
So, as well, I mean, we're talking about how film changes, right? Horror changes through the years as well. I don't know. I mean, you're saying like first use the word horror in films, but how many horror films were based out of books at that point? Because I mean, how many?
A lot of them were drawing off literature. That's pretty much where they got all their inspiration. So you had Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
And it was beginning to move into, I mean, obviously like Nosferatu and Dr. Caligari and stuff. That was all silent because no sound at the time. Hadn't learned to sync that up yet. But obviously, you got the whole organ organ going on, making terrifying sounds, bah, bah, bah. And they were emulating things like screams and stuff with organs, and that was all kind of happening, which is very cool. I mean, that's clever shit, right? So like you're playing scary music, woman on the screen is talking. They were playing music. Suddenly she screams, and there's a scream, and that's a break, that's a snap, that's a jump scare that you're not expecting.
Right up to this day, music is still used to create jump scares.
I think live music might have been more terrifying than like recorded music, though. Like when it was silent, and they used to just have like a pianist or like an organist.
But every theatre has an organ player in it, or at least a piano, right? And you've got like these scores specifically written for the films, and it's all. Can you imagine making that then? So you're trying to make horror, and you've got to make something that you've got to hope someone can play correctly on an organ. It's got to sync up with the screaming and everything else that's going on.
Or on just whatever piece of like musical crap they had in that
Spoons.
cinema. Like
Yeah,
you
kazoo.
you don't know that someone's going to have all of that, right? So like it's so easy. It's so easy now to have ominous terror because music is every well it is. Every
No,
cinema experience is the same.
I'm playing the spoons and Mark's playing the kazoo. And in my brain, when we stopped doing that and you were talking, my brain just carried on the skit. And the woman screams on film. And for some reason, the musical instrument I've got to produce that scream in my brain was a cow that someone just slapped gently on the arse. And it goes, "Mrrr," and everyone's like, "Oh my God." And for some reason, I found that deeply funny. I'm so sorry. I don't know where that carried on from. Kazoo, spoons, cow. That's how the 1920s horror films are made.
Carry on, Holly.
But, so now every cinema experience is the same, right? You walk into any cinema in the country and like the experience is basically like the nuts and bolts of the experience is the same. You have the same like
what are you eating?
Right.
Oh,
you have
God.
You have like no, but I mean like Kit's mad at you.
They're horror filmed. They're horrible.
Oh, they're really tasty. I like those. Like, but the nuts and bolts of the experience is the same because the movie is the same. The soundtrack is the soundtrack is part of the movie. There's no, but you don't have like any kind of differences in like how that music is played. So
no, it's but there are screenings where you'll have a full orchestra. So today they'll make special events of full orchestras with the film playing, and you'll have the music played live. Like, so that becomes a big event.
Yeah. But like, I mean, this being like, you know, like your little teeny tiny cinema round the corner, and they've only got like a little teeny tiny piano. Like trying to make that sound as horrifying as the people that have got like the big organs is going to be really difficult.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely.
But you have to remember that you are in a period where all of this is new. Yeah, this is new. It's fascinating. It's intimidating, and if it's a horror film, then it's scary because you haven't seen anything like this before. So the fact that there's just this music, is that your cat screaming in the background?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Good. Thank you very much. Scary cat. But yeah, so I mean, we are looking back on this from a very modern perspective, with all our bells and whistles and special
Hollywood
effects and stuff.
Churning out films faster than it is now. They were churning out like 100 films a week at that point because everyone with a camera was just filming something that was half an hour long, and horror films are like 25 minutes long.
Well, horror films have always been a mainstay for low budget and quickly produced low budget because there's always an audience out there for them. And I was going to say the other thing about horror films is throughout the history of horror films, you get the periods of outrage, the periods where a horror film has really almost offended the audience and especially offended the censors back in those days. The first occurrence of a film being censored, a horror film being censored, was in the 1930s with Todd Browning's The Freaks.
That one I definitely knew.
It was censored to such a degree that apparently there is no full copy of it in existence anymore because it was excised so much. But and again, I have not seen this film, and I'd like to get a copy of it. I'm sure it's available somewhere online.
What's left of it?
What's left of it, yeah. But apparently it's still quite a disturbing viewing. And that's back in the 1930s. And then, you've got later on, you've got the video nasties and all the other themes within horror films throughout the years where people have tried to just go that little bit further and
it's funny though, isn't it?
Push the envelope, push what's acceptable.
Some films now or TV shows, they will use, they'll use old films like that as fodder for Terror Factor, because they'll have like, this film was made in the 1930s. It contains moments from a and that film in the film is terrifying, and it's made more terrifying because it's old. If you know what I mean, they'll have the protagonist in the film will find a film that was made in the 1930s or 1920s, and that in itself has got like some terrible curse attached to it, and they really bring to life the essence of those films that were made back then, because a lot of them were just revolved around curses or kind of.
I mean, whatever. I mean, such one of my favourite films. It's kind of a little bit further later on, but one of my favourite films revolves around a curse. But we'll get to that later. But it's what I would call one of the classics.
Is it Brendan Fraser's The Mummy? Because if it's not, it should be.
No, it's not.
Do you want to tell the audience why Freaks was banned?
Because I'm not entirely sure, but I think it was the theme of it, the fact they did use genuine, who would have been referred to back then as circus freaks, within the film.
It was deemed exploitative people with disabilities for commercial gain.
Yeah.
But only by the British Board of Film Classification.
Yeah. But I still don't think there's a complete copy of it out there from what I was reading about it. But yeah, it was an exploitative film, which again is something horror does quite a lot throughout the decades, is there's exploitation. It's kind of tied up with the whole thing.
Exploitation as a theme is very different from like exploitation of like, I can only imagine that in this case, like with Freaks, that it was exploitation of like the actual people that appeared in
the actors,
the actors, rather than as a theme of the characters. I'm not letting you go because all four of your feet are
rejected by British censors and banned due to alarming content and too explicit a display of humans with the starkest of physical disability.
Yeah. So that was 1930s, the first censorship of horror films. And we got into later on, we got into the whole video nasties, but again, we can come to that. And then kind of you moved into the 1940s, which although it was like a war era decade, you got some of the all-time classics of early horror films in terms of actors. I mean, you've already had Boris Karloff, and Bela Lugosi from the 30s, the Universal films. But then you had Lon Chaney Jr. This is the person I was saying, Man of a Thousand Faces, Holly. Who was an astounding makeup artist for that time. And he would just make his face look like inhuman things. And then Peter Lorre and John Carradine. There was a whole collection of specifically or very much attached to the horror genre actors that came out in the 30s and 40s and kind of stayed with that genre for many, many films. So you were creating a pool of actors who were specifically there for, that was what they were famous for doing horror films. And obviously you got your Peter Cushings and your Vincent Price and Christopher Lee later on. But again, actors who were renowned for doing horror stuff and were really respected as well. Sorry?
Peter Lorre did make it into
Casablanca. Oh yeah, he did.
Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre's the voice of my little ventriloquist doll.
So anyway,
yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that. Not at all.
But Peter Lorre had a glorious voice. He was really. He had the voice for horror films.
He was born in Laszlo as well.
Yeah.
Laszlo.
So I mean, you have things like The Invisible Man's. The names of some of these films were just marvelous. The Invisible Man, Revenge, The Beast with Five Fingers, and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. They were all films within like the 40s.
And you're talking about a period where actors have become like what we're talking about here is like a time period where they were like almost lords of cinema, but because they were so invested in the horror that they appeared in, that everyone wanted to go and see the next Karloff movie, not the next kind of next producer, they want to go and see the actors in those things be
Exactly that.
incredible, right? That's the evolution of the cinema we're talking about, right?
Yeah, they were what's the term,
Headline.
headline banner actors. They were the top of the film on the poster, above the title of the film. Boris Karloff stars in The Mummy. So yeah, and I don't. There were probably other genres which had equally famous actors and actresses of that era in different genres, but specifically within the horror genre, there were some really well-known and well-remembered names who persisted for decades. And then
But
you got
mentioned
into
earlier, last episode as well, just to hammer that home, because Frankenstein's and that kind of thing. These were the costumes that people were wearing. This is like when Halloween was evolving and people were dressing up. This is the first mass-produced costumes were coming out of these actors. So their makeup styles are copied and put onto crap masks.
Well, that's where Frankenstein comes from now, right? Like,
that whole look,
like that whole Boris Karloff kind of thing,
with the giant heavy boots and stuff.
Yeah, and like the big, like, and it's been the inspiration for so many other things, right? Like Lurch in the Addams Family is like is like a derivation of the Addams Family. I can handle. Addams Family is not too scary for me.
Yeah, so we're talking about like a time when, as cinema changed, what these actors became so famous and so powerful that they are now the pillars in many ways of how we celebrate part of Halloween and this time of year, and Gothmas, as we were calling it last time out.
Love Gothmas.
Yeah, I mean they're there. They're in all. They're they're on posters still. They appear in computer games. They are that those icons of that era are still very prevalent now. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to the point where the Thriller video had Vincent Price narrating.
I've just realised that last episode, Holly didn't say anything about Hercules.
I didn't. I realised that too. I absolutely.
And we didn't mention spam either.
So you may remember that at Fantasy Forest this year, Stephen interviewed Elle Lavery, who is a stilt walker, trick rider, and general human being extraordinaire. She'll be doing some charity work this October, and she's got a message for you about how you can sponsor her. Over to you, Elle.
Hey, thanks, Holly. I mean, like, human being is a very strong description for me. Not many people describe me as human. But yeah, I won't take up too much of your time on this podcast because I'm sure you've listened to many other wonderful things said. But I just wanted to quickly do a shout out is that me and my amazing friend Hugo, who is far more experienced at doing stuff like this, we are going to attempt to complete all of Hadrian's Wall, which is 84 miles in under 48 hours, dressed as Romans, and to raise money for a couple of causes. This is Oxford Mutual Aid, which are like an amazing charity in Oxford that get like emergency drops and supplies and food out to people in need. And my own taekwondo club, Fleet Taekwondo, which is an ITF taekwondo club run by Mr. Oliver, which it's a relatively, he's newly regenerated it quite recently, and it is such a great environment for bringing together kids and adults from all sorts of backgrounds that really would not have the experience to learn and train and move forwards in this environment without him being there. And he's just like, he'll probably get quite embarrassed about how much I love what he's doing there, but it's such a great environment, and I'm hoping to raise some money towards some additional equipment, so that we're starting to do a few competitions, and it'll just give us the area to do more in that area. But yeah, so me and Hugo and the most amazing support team, we're going to, at the end of October, head up to Hadrian's Wall and start Friday morning, probably before the sun's up, and aim to finish around Saturday midday. We're not going to sleep in that period of time. We're going to push through the night time. So if you could maybe, even if you can't give a couple of quid, I know times are hard at the moment, but recommend songs and podcasts for me. It's going to be horrific, but I'm going to love moments of it. And if you can give a couple of quid or just share it to others, I'm just going to see how much we can raise doing this. And there's nothing to do with me being competitive, that my dad at my age did the width of England in chainmail. So of course I need to do something like this.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. So we will pop a link down below, and we'll pop one in our show notes as well. And yeah, as Elle says, if there is anything that that you can donate for these causes, then please go ahead and do so. Thank you for joining us and for telling us more about what you're up to. And hopefully we will see you on the podcast after you've done it to tell us more about how it went.
Yeah, and I apologise if you'll find that one person won't be listening to any episodes between now and there, because I need 48 hours of podcasts saved up to get through it all.
Perfect. Well, we will have a lot of episodes to come, so you can save those for when you're walking.
But yes, where are we going with that? We were talking about
1997's Disney's Hercules, the side-scrolling game.
Sideways-scrolling game.
That's
Sorry,
exactly
Mark,
what we're talking
I
about.
interrupted you right in the middle of making a point because it suddenly dawned on me that Holly hadn't mentioned. But we've done that now, though, so that's all good.
That's fine. All is well in the world. Well,
Yes.
I was going to lead on to the 1950s because again, I was saying that horror films have always been this genre where they can be made cheap and they can be made fast, and there is always an audience out for them, especially with, like in America, with like drive-in movie theaters, and taking your girl to a drive-in movie theater to watch a horror film. You know, you're guaranteed to have a bit of a cutch there, because hey, whatever, you know, stuff, things. Anyway, lousy American accent. But you got some glorious films and lots of gimmicks, like 3D started to come in. Yeah, you red and green 3D glasses, and you had gimmicks like buzzers in seats, and you'd have stooges in the audience to scream and faint at things. But you got one of my favourite all time, still to this very day, favourite monster films, because I always love the monsters.
It's the Creature from the Black Lagoon.
It really is.
You should know this, listeners, because he's told us this before. So bonus points to you if you knew that already.
Who apparently is turning 70 this year, because Creature from Black Lagoon came out in 1954 and is turning 70 this year. Good old Creech. But you had other, like, these were a lot of films that I saw growing up. Things like The Tingler. Yeah, which is
the what? Sorry,
the Tingler. It was this fear incarnate, which sort of became a thing, like a big slug, which attached to your spine. Yeah, and during the showings in the cinemas when it first came out, they put buzzers in the backs of the seats, which they could activate. So when the Tingler appeared on screen, the back of your seat would buzz. It's on my back. And a Fiend Without a Face. Oh, I loved Fiend Without a Face.
Were you? Sorry, this is the 19th. Were you alive when this happened, or is this just something you know about?
No, I wasn't alive.
I didn't think so.
These were the films that I got to see on TV.
It's the Tingler bit with the buzzers. It sounds like you were physically there.
No, the reason I know these things is because when I was younger, I collected books on horror films. I have a small library of hardback books which talk about all of these horror films, and I read them. I just devoured them. I would get them for Christmas. I'd get them for my birthday, and I have my mum to thank for my love of horror films, because she would buy me these books. She was the one who would be watching them herself and eventually let me watch one or two of them, because I wouldn't go to sleep otherwise. So I learned about all these things and all the tricks that they were using to just try and get people into the cinema. I mean, like I think it was The Exorcist, one of the gimmicks they had was you had to sign a disclaimer that if you died watching this film, that you wouldn't sue the cinema or the makers.
Hang on. If
any...
you died, you wouldn't sue.
Yeah,
well, your estate wouldn't sue. But all these gimmicks were coming in the 50s to try and get bums on seats. But it was the horror movies that were that were pushing all of these little innovations. Yeah, you didn't get 3D romances, you didn't get 3D, crime dramas. You got 3D horror films and 3D sci-fi films, and that's where you were trying to get more immersion
It's
in
funny.
your experience.
The first 3D film I went to see, and the new craze for it, like 15 years ago or whatever, was Monsters versus Aliens, I think it was called, where you've got the
the
monsters.
animated one.
Oh yeah, I quite
and
like that. It's
and
good fun.
that's what I went back to see, and it had the creature from the Black Lagoon, Dr. Cockroach. Who else?
Yes.
I can't remember who else was in it, but that was a grand film.
Did,
but yeah, that was a horror film.
Did
Yeah.
your first
Mothra.
Stephen, your like when they first brought out like 3D, face is really disconcerting. When they first brought out 3D, does that work for you?
Yeah.
Even though you can't see color.
Yeah, it's cars I can see. Yeah, that's fine.
But it makes it 3D still.
Yeah.
Oh, how does that work? That's
I
interesting.
don't know. I just put the glasses on and went, "This is cool." I'm like it's like cotton. I'm happy to wear it, but I have no idea how it works.
One of the best things I ever learnt about cotton was that in
Yes. Is it
Heavy
Halloween
tangent.
related?
No, it's not Halloween related. But in German, the German for cotton is Baumwolle, which is literally tree wool because it looks like wool and it grows on trees. It's the best cotton fact I know. Okay.
Cotton picking great.
So again, we can see that the I find it all very kind of powerful how because I was going to say that even in like that era, sci-fi films were becoming very popular. That they were having like a really big rise, but a load of those were just basically terrifying. They were designed to be scary, right?
And there's quite a grey area between sci-fi and horror. I mean, you think of Alien, for example.
Terrifying.
Alien is a sci-fi horror, but yeah, that sci-fi and horror have kind of slipped between each other, and things like Them. Yeah.
Oh, you've got
giant radioactive ants. Yeah. Sci-fi horror. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Fantastic film.
That was a terrifying film.
Been remade a number of times. Well, that came out in the 50s. Terror from Beyond Space, which is actually apparently the inspiration for the basic storyline of Alien.
It was
an alien gets on board a spaceship and kills people.
Yes. 12 feet tall.
So sci-fi and horror.
Mewed like a cat.
Mewed like a cat.
There was
you're thinking of
The Thing.
The Thing.
Yes. I am. When I was very small, my uncle or someone bought me a big book of horror, and it was really quite graphic and it had like horrible images in it and stuff. But I was quite pleased with it. But we had to do a presentation at school when I was like 8 or something, and I did my presentation on The Thing because I had this book about horror and we were supposed to do a film. So I stood up, I just read verbatim I memorized this passage from the book. So I got to stand up in front of my class and go, The Thing was 8 feet tall, hairless, and mewed like a cat. And then I remember that quite vividly. And then everyone fell about me laughing because to a lot of people, when you're 8, Thing is your willy. So it made everyone laugh quite a lot. And I just ploughed on with my...
Well, it was also referred to as an intelligent carrot. So, Willy analogy there as well. Space Willy.
Yes, I remember that was quite amusing. Anyway, that was my anecdote. So horror's moving on, and I can only imagine, like, again, this is like, as you're saying, like taking your best gal to the drive-in because she'll be terrified and hug you a lot, whatever. That whole thing, that's got to be a big Halloween thing in America, right? That's got to be a thing, driving in, that kind of stuff. So, film's really starting to take over, and we're still using that kind of stuff now because we go to the cinema now, and we kind of go for the weekends around Halloween when they're showing all of Friday the 13th or whatever. So we still do this. We still kind of gather to watch the terrifying films, and this will
It's
But
it's like a fun ride. It's like a roller coaster.
But you're
I
talking
think.
about films that were specifically written to terrify you, right? So, like, and with the buzzers in the seats in the
Mhm.
cinema and stuff, yeah.
But the
Zombies.
50s was when other things started happening, like when Hitchcock started producing like The Birds and Rebecca and like and Psycho and
They came out
that
in
was
the
the
60s.
60s.
Yeah.
But like at that kind of point in time, like there's a whole like let's use the techniques that we learned in horror films to take the darker elements of like regular films that aren't designed to terrify and make them terrifying. Like let's make things, that you can start making things darker and grittier because of what you've learned from horror films before. Like psychological thrillers and stuff like that, yeah. And things like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, like there's a lot of like old horror technique in, and I know that is like later than we're currently on in Mark's list of glory, but
there's one more film in the 50s that I have to
do the 50s
to address. Well, I remember I was saying about one of my favourite films is about a curse.
Yeah.
And it's Night of the Demon. And it is a brilliant film because it's one of those things where they changed directors and they tagged an actual puppet demon on the start and the end of the film, which wasn't really meant to be there and doesn't really work. But everything in between it is just gloriously spooky because you don't see anything. All you hear is the noise of the demon. No. There's the passing of the runes. But this one thing, Holly, that you will like, the hero is going through the woods to this warlock's house, and he's going through the woods, and then there are these footprints, flaming footprints, which start appearing, walking through the woods in this big ball of flame up above the trees. And the classic line is, "It's in the trees, it's coming." And where is that from?
That is from Hounds of Love.
Yep, it is.
That is a Kate Bush. Like I always wondered where that was from.
That's where it comes from.
It's coming.
Night of the Demon. Watch it. It's a glorious film. Even the puppet demon thing at the start and the finish is not bad.
No,
but the film is brilliant.
I just can't make myself do it. Like I've had like there are horror films that I love. Like there are scary films that I love because scary and horror are two different things, I think. And there are scary films that I really love, but when it gets into like I just can't do it. I just can't sit down and go, I'm going to be scared by this film and I'm going to be okay with that. There's a huge block in my brain. And even when like the worst is like comedy horror, like when horror is supposed to be, it scares me even worse than regular horror.
Patches.
Stitches.
Stitches.
I love
That's
Stitches.
A fucking awesome film.
I love Stitches. Like that's like Ross Noble being a dead clown. That's great.
Fuck's sake.
I can't do things like Planet Terror. I can't do like there was a movie that came out called Idle Hands, which was like a stoner movie in like the late 90s or early 2000s, and it was about a guy who was like he was basically like he was just a massive stoner and he sat around his parents' place all day and did nothing. So one of his hands got possessed by the devil. And it was like making him do like all of this, like weird stuff. And then eventually like it murdered his parents while he was attached to it. And then he hid them in the garden under great big jack-o'-lantern heads.
Like the beast with 5 fingers.
Like,
or Evil Dead.
But like, or Evil Dead, yeah. But he like cut off his hand and then he put it in the microwave. And from that point on, I just couldn't watch it anymore. There's just something, there's just like a block in my, I don't want to be scared by things. I just don't want to do it.
And yet you do Cthulhu.
Yeah, and yet as you Cthulhu, because I read horror novels, I read horror books, I listen to like horror podcasts. I just can't do horror films. I don't know what it is.
Well, I'll do the horror films for you.
Excellent. When we talk about horror books, I'm all over that. Especially Stephen King.
Well, the other before we move on, the other genre. I mean, I grew up on all these, the films that I've been talking about, but there was also Hammer as well, Hammer horror. Another Kate Bush reference for you. But Hammer horror was very much. I think it was more edgy than the universal things because you had naked ladies in some of them, in some of the later ones, but there was always heaving bosoms.
There was always a lot of raunch going on in
yeah.
horror.
Yeah.
I mean, when I came across, sorry, that's a wrong phrase. When I first encountered Twins of Evil,
if you were doing
and the vampire lovers, I was far too young for that.
If that's why you were watching it,
I was far too young for that. But Twins of Evil and Vampire Lovers were very much like, whoa, okay, this isn't really horror, is it? This is the vampires, but woof. But things like that, I liked. Obviously, I like the Dracula and the Frankenstein and all, Quatermass in the Pit and all those Hammer things. But again, I was drawn more to the monsters. So, like, there's the Reptile. I remember watching that, and that was fantastic. Jacqueline Pearce, a very young Jacqueline Pearce, who later became Servalan in Blake 7.
And was Miss Vole.
It was who?
Miss Vole. And Miss Raven.
Okay, well.
But Holly, you've only seen one episode of it that she was in.
Miss Vole and Miss Raven.
She was in the Moondial. She was terrifying.
Oh, in Moondial. Oh, right.
She was also obviously iconically Servalan, but and Chessini in Doctor Who.
I really want to watch more Moondial.
Because it's fucking terrifying.
Yeah, not as terrifying.
You like being scared.
I don't like being scared, but Moondial looks like it's a children's program, so I might be okay.
So, like, as we're moving into the 70s and 80s,
don't talk about Mr. Nosy Bonk.
The children's stuff in the 80s and the late 70s that were on TV were ridiculously terrifying. I mean, you had like Chucky, which was John Wyndham book. He wrote The Seeds of Doom, and he wrote like Day of the Triffids, and Chucky's equally as terrifying if you're 6, but it's made it a TV show.
Paper House. Yeah. Based on Marianne Dreams.
I love Marianne Dreams.
Yeah, the Paper House was a TV series made based on that. And then you had Children of the Stone, and there's a lot of creepy stuff going on for kids.
Moondial specifically, we watched like an episode of Moondial. Granted, it was so pixelated and so old that I couldn't actually see what was really going on, but it didn't seem that scary.
Yeah, that's just like for anyone watching, you can see that I'm quite pixelated and Mark's really pixelated and Holly's only a little bit pixelated because of our ages.
I love it.
Well, okay, back to the subject. 60s. Yeah?
So, yeah, we're talking about changing as it changes and changes the world around us and like why it's changing and stuff. So, like the 60s and 70s had a very different feel. Like you said, it all became heaving bosoms. Like a lot of the bands and stuff was something lifted. You could do a lot more with stuff on screen in the 60s and the 70s, which changed a lot of kind of how things were made.
There was a big transitional change in the 60s and especially into the 70s. I mean, in the 60s you had Psycho and you had The Birds, so you were getting really mainstream directors moving into the horror genre, and you got things like Rosemary's Baby, another classic.
Terrifying.
Yeah, Mia Farrow, and was it Roman Polanski directed Rosemary's Baby? I think so, maybe.
One of the best Halloween costumes ever, by the way, The Birds. There was a girl.
I've seen that. Yes.
No, I went to a party with a girl once, and she just had like a headband thing on with loads of little Tweety pies just stuck out the front of it. Like that was her effort, Halloween costume, which I thought was fantastic.
I love that.
Carry on.
Also, the 60s had probably my all-time favourite ever horror film, which I don't think will ever be beaten, which is The Haunting, based on Shirley Jackson's book of the same name. And that is just, to me, the perfect horror film because everything is implied. You never see anything, but it's done with camera angles, it's done with minimal special effects, and it's done with a beautiful soundscape.
Is Is that the same as the one that Catherine Zeta-Jones?
Oh dear
was
God,
in?
no! Oh, that just let us know. That's the only time I've ever got my money back in the cinema
Oh,
because it missed the point of the original film on every single fucking level. It is an abomination of a film. Never mention that again in my presence. It makes me angry. No, it's theoretically it's based on the same film, but
Right, okay. Theoretically, it's based on the Shirley Jackson. They're both based on the Shirley Jackson book. Okay.
it is based on that. But
And then there's the Netflix, The Haunting of Hill House. That's
Yeah.
that's kind of the same vibe.
it's I think it's basically the same root source.
it was all right.
I haven't
Again.
watched it.
But I've watched it with hopes, and it had some nice bits in it, but it kind of twisted the ending.
Yeah.
And I just think the original Haunting, is the perfect horror film for me
Okay.
because it scared the crap out of me, and it will still scare the crap out of me
Okay.
because it's all about what's around the corner and what's the other side of that door, and you never see it.
I'm gonna have to lightsaber poke you slightly into the 70s because we're
Oh
doing
well,
it all the time. When everything
fair
changed,
enough.
we've got a lot of blood
70s.
going on and gore in the 70s.
Yeah, God, there was a lot of gore. I mean, you had things like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Hills Have Eyes, Dawn of the Dead, and then you had the influx of like Italian directors coming in, like Dario Argento.
Well, this is the real. Just to touch on that, it's a real influence, though, kind of immediately on how we do things like Halloween today, because it's full of zombies this period of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
because they were cheap.
Why?
That's
They were
the
cheap to
classic
make.
now.
You
No,
slap some blood over an actor,
What
and
would you
hey,
mean? Why
presto, you got a
suddenly
zombie.
were they a thing?
Yeah, like what was the cultural shift there that precluded
The zeitgeist that caused zombies.
Yeah, why the 70s? Why did
question.
that
I
happen
don't
there?
know.
Like what is that? Where is the
Well,
line?
It's also, I think, maybe a cultural thing because a lot of the directors who were producing those zombie type films were Italian. So I was going to say you had Dario Argento, Lucio Fulci, Bruno Moretti, Bruno Mattei. And a lot of these sort of, what do you call them, exploitative, but they were far more shocking and graphic and visceral than a lot of stuff that was being produced over in America or in the UK.
Well, maybe
And those came in the 70s.
Is there a can we point towards things like maybe like those people from that period had grown up like living in fear of things like the atomic bomb dropping on them? I mean, that's something we don't have anymore today. We don't worry about that much.
No, that influenced a lot of sci-fi. I mean,
Well, I mean, it's like
the
because zombies
atomic
are very much related to like kind of radiation and afterwards and that kind of stuff. Maybe
not actually, no. It was generally voodoo or
voodoo.
some curse or something, or it was just inexplicable. Like Night of the Living Dead, they never really explained why the dead were rising. They just were.
Yeah, but see, that's the thing I want to know. If the dead are rising, I want to know why. Like, I don't just want to accept that as fact.
But I kind of I would disagree.
That's fine.
To an extent, because but I think keeping mystery, keeping the unknown, is kind of an effective way of doing things. Like the original Alien, you didn't know what any of it was about. You didn't know where to come from. You had this big derelict. You had the space jockey and all of that. None of it was explained. And because none of it was explained, it had that mystery, and you never knew what to expect. As soon as in the later films they started explaining what it was, and you had the engineers and all of this bollocks that they've added to it since, it kind of lost that mystery. But I think the unknown, the unseen, the inexplicable, the unexplained is kind of a core successful element of a good horror film.
Maybe that's why I don't like them.
Maybe.
I can't find a reason.
Moving into the
80s.
80s slasher movies.
Yeah, that was just
slasher movies just came in the 80s. Well, at the end of the 70s and into the 80s. Friday the 13th, 1980. Halloween was actually 1978. Nightmare on Elm Street, 84.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Evil Dead 81. And you also got the whole video nasties thing that came in the 80s, really, late 70s and into the 80s, where it was this thing of trying to push the boundaries again. It was trying, how gory can we get? How nasty can we get? And they were only banned in the UK because you had idiots in charge of censorship.
Yeah, but if you're talking about Margert specifically, right? This is the time, I think, that you would now call kind of the iconic period of film that influences kind of the Halloween Margert sort of phenomenon we're living in today.
Oh, yeah.
I think
your Jason Voorhees and your
Yep.
your Freddy Kruegers and your
this is
Michael Myers.
But more than anything else, I think in this period, I mean, I know, like, so you've moved away from the 40s and the 50s, where like kind of your people that are in peril, like, oh, hello, I'm sort of a middle-aged chap who's going to fight vampires, whatever, you know, and you're now into proper like kind of 15-year-old. You know, this is the screaming teenagers kind of
teenagers
period.
running,
and you're speaking to an audience of people that do want to go out and party and dress up and stuff, and then because you're saying to them, oh, we've noticed that the cultural phenomenon around us is that kids go out at Halloween and do stuff, so we're going to put them in films and we're going to murder them, so that when they are going out in real life and doing stuff at Halloween, they're going to shit their pants a bit, and that's really carried through to like what we do now, which is glorious. They're still making those films and TV shows, right?
Yeah. Well, there's the whole running around being slaughtered thing.
What do you fancy doing tonight, Mark? Do you want to go out and run around and be slaughtered?
Run around and be slaughtered. Let's go and visit Camp Crystal Lake. I heard it's nice this time of year. But that brought. I mean, you had the special effects artists like Tom Savini coming along in that era and producing really, I mean, looking back on it now from today's perspective, quite primitive special effects, but for the era, they were gloriously gory. Yeah, machetes in heads and arms being chopped off, and ice picks in ears and all of that. But it went for the slasher movie, and that became like a really big genre in itself, which is kind of still exists today.
Modern iconography, right? We spoke about Frankenstein being the iconography of the 40s and 50s, 30s that pervades now. Now it's the Freddy Krueger hand coming out the bath and the
Oh no! Don't why would you say it? Why?
Those characters,
they're important.
Those characters are equally iconic now. Alongside Frankenstein, you've got your Jason Voorhees and you've got your Michael Myers, and they are horror icons.
And your Pinhead
in the same way. I was going to say, because Hellraiser came out in the 80s as well. The Thing and The Evil Dead, all fantastic films, and like special effects were really coming on during the 80s. And then also you got a lot of mainstream horror as well. That it wasn't just the independent, small low budget productions going on. You got things like Poltergeist, and you got Gremlins, and you got The Shining, you got American Werewolf in London.
Oh, you made Holly smile when you said Gremlins.
Yeah,
I like Gremlins.
Is that because it's got cute?
It's because it's got Mogwai in it.
Mogwai,
and it's not really a horror film, but it's family horror, isn't it?
I was going to say, it's
and the same as
kids.
Poltergeist is family horror. So like the mainstream Hollywood was trying to adopt this genre, I think, and package it in a way which was presentable to whole families.
Well, successfully, really.
Yeah, absolutely successfully. And then you got the video nasties, and you got a lot. I just got a list of names here. Let me read out the titles to these.
Yeah.
You got Zombie Flesh Eaters, Driller Killer, I Spit on Your Grave, Cannibal Apocalypse, Cannibal Ferox, Cannibal Holocaust, Slave of the Cannibalistic God. I mean, there's a lot of cannibalism going on in these films. Yeah.
Wasn't one of these like picked up? It might have been later. It might have been like later, like more recently. But I swear there was like a cannibal movie that had like that got like pulled up.
When people thought it was real.
Oh, you're talking about snuff movies?
No, I'm not talking about snuff movies. No. I'm talking about there is a cannibal movie. I think it might be like Cannibal Holocaust. That kind of rings a bell.
Yeah, those rumors
where like it was actual cannibalism. Like
Well,
So they thought it was real. They moved. They hid everyone off. It was called Cannibal Holocaust. Was the
that's
one.
it.
yeah,
And no, sorry for a movie that was so graphic and realistic. Some people thought it was real, and then the crew, the film crew in the film vanished in the rainforest in the movie, and the producer tried to hide the actors so that everyone thought that actually died. This
Yeah.
caused a bit of controversy.
Right,
Yeah,
gotcha.
Ruggero Deodato. I can't remember his name.
Okay.
It's not like Rugged Deodato. I can't remember.
Rugged Diadem. Let's just call him Rugged Diadem.
there are
yeah.
also a lot of things within film titles that you weren't meant to do. So don't go near the park, don't go in the basement, don't go in the woods. Lots of warnings. This is just a whole list of these really cheap, low budget video nasties, as they were termed back in, when Mary Whitehouse was having a...
For those who are younger listeners, Mary Whitehouse was an old lady who lived in the 1980s and complained about anything that was even vaguely horrible, including such things as Doctor Who and Blake Seven and stuff. It was just, no, you can't show that on television.
Yeah.
So
she got a lot of stuff banned in the UK. Fortunately, my best mate, his brother owned a video shop, a VHS video shop, and we used to get really grainy third or fourth generation copies of a lot of these films and sit and watch them go, oh, this is great, isn't it? But they were so low budget. But again, that was a lot of the Italian directors were producing stuff which is on that video nasty list. And they were just bringing in stuff. It's kind of just slightly culturally different, I think.
So, yeah, but now we kind of move into the completely modern day era as we're going to go into the 90s and noughties.
90s are good ones. You had some classics in there. Blair Witch.
I was going to say found footage stuff started happening with the Blair Witch. Yeah. Well, technically, that Holocaust film, that Cannibal Holocaust, that was apparently the very first of the.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah, but we also had Cube.
Yeah. I put that down on my list, especially for Holly as well.
Thank you. I love Cube.
It's a good film.
Cube is brilliant. Cube 2 Hypercube, just as good. Cube 0, ooh, love that. I love that
for
film.
Hercules.
I love Hercules. I really do. I'm still struggling with the side-scrolling game though.
I think we've really started to get proper imports like The Ring, as you put down the list. I was desperate to bring out things like The Ring because that really started to change a lot of. Again, Halloween stuff. That was much more terrifying than people were used to, I think. The Ring, a completely different approach to film.
But again, a cultural import.
Yeah.
So it's doing horror from a non-Hollywood perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Which is always, and you can see in the remakes, right? Because, I might not like horror, but I've watched, a reasonable amount of horror films because when you were, when The Ring was coming out and stuff, I was in that point of life where people were like, let's watch a really scary movie, and you want to seem like you're not terrified of everything that isn't pink or a pony, so you say yes. And I've watched things and it's probably not horror, but the biggest distinction I think in where you can see them just stripping any kind of cultural emotion building out of a film is Oldboy. Oldboy in the original Oldboy was phenomenal, and it was terrifying, and it was creepy and weird. And then there was remake Oldboy, and it was just there. And it's the same with things like The Ring, Grudge. The Grudge was terrifying.
Hollywoodization of things.
Yeah, it's the sanitization. Yeah. It's let's
let
make
the right one in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good example.
Wreck and Quarantine.
Yeah, Wreck's on my list as a fantastic film, a definite recommendation. The original Wreck, brilliant.
We're going to go through this a little bit more in detail. We haven't got much time left, so I think at this point, however, when we get to the 90s and noughties, I think the movies that we're going to talk about briefly are going to be ones that stopped affecting the cultural phenomenon that is Halloween around us. We talk about the 80s and stuff being really quite impactful in iconic figures that people will happily dress up as now, and you can see them in shops and stuff. You can still go out and buy them. Stops happening, I think, quite in the 90s onwards. You still get a few, but not that whole iconic period. It's we're waiting for the next bit to happen. You don't really get a lot of people wanting to dress as the Babadook for for Halloween. It's not a common thing to happen. But
and sequels as well. You don't get a lot of because things like Friday the 13th and Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street spawned loads and loads of sequels.
They're
So
still
those
making
characters
Halloween, aren't they?
became,
Yeah, they are.
And Freddy versus Jason, and
Oh, that was appalling. That
I
was
know,
as
but
bad
the
as Aliens
point is they're
versus
making it,
Predator.
right?
Hey,
It's
I
like
liked
Alien
Alien
versus
versus Predator.
Yeah.
I liked Alien versus Predator.
No,
It gave
but
me some
there's-
good backstory. It gave me some good
Cool,
lore. It's what
Yeah, see, over-explaining things again.
Yeah, you see, I love it. I like
Yeah.
understanding where things come from, which is probably why I'm an anthropologist. But like like if they're still, they're still making, like, they made like 7 or 8 Nightmare on Elm Streets, and the thing that makes them iconic isn't for me isn't necessarily like the fact that they made like 7 or 8 of them. It's the fact that like they were parodied on, like, The Simpsons parodied Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh,
you
yes.
know, like how ingrained they became in
Treehouse
pop
of Terror.
culture, the Treehouse of Terror, like, yeah, how ingrained they became in that in pop culture, like when I was growing up. Because if it hadn't have been, like, if I hadn't seen like the Simpsons episode that parodied Nightmare on Elm Street, I wouldn't have had any idea growing up what it was. Like, people in my house didn't watch horror movies. Like, when I watched Nightmare on Elm Street, I watched it with my dad in the middle of the day with all the curtains open, all the lights on a very tiny television screen, and I was still terrified and didn't sleep for 2 weeks. But like, it's that bleeding into like parody, and like when people do sketches of stuff on Saturday Night Live, or when people are doing, like, now it's people making TikTok trends out of like the dance from Wednesday and stuff like that. Like, that's how it continues. That's how things kind of keep going past what may, in previous generations, in previous decades, have had a sell-by date. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's things which, I guess, transcend the genre and just become a broader cultural phenomenon. Yeah?
Yeah.
It's like, if you don't like sci-fi, you'll still know what Star Wars is. If you don't know who Jason Voorhees is, you'll still recognise the hockey mask and an axe.
Terrifying.
Mark, do you think you can mount the rotting corpse of your long dead horse and ride us towards the end of the?
I will do it quickly. Well, I was going to talk about the different trends in horror briefly. I mean, you've got the body horror, which has sort of resurfaced, has come and gone throughout films. I mean, things like The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, that's definitely a body horror. Videodrome, Society, if you've never seen the film Society.
We've had this conversation before. Yeah. I'm not doing that.
And Slither as well, to really just gross out body horror. And then you got a whole genre which I have looked at a couple of films within and just not just I don't want to look any further. But it's like it's referred to as torture porn quite often, but I think it's more about the captivity. Remember we were saying about running away from people like Jason Voorhees, and there was a lot of running. Running to get away.
Yeah, it had to be really fit to be in a horror film. Yeah.
And he would, even though he plodded along at a light stroll, he'd still catch you eventually.
Yeah,
there's this whole genre. Yeah, he was unstoppable. Yeah, but both Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers, unstoppable, just relentless. But this genre of what a lot of people refer to as torture porn is about captivity, about the inability to being able to flee, and you're a victim and you're stuck and you're at the mercy of somebody. I'm thinking things like Saw. I watched the first couple of Saws, but after a while it's like, yeah, I don't really.
I've never found them for me, to be honest.
No, it was the pit full of hypodermic needles in Saw 2. After that, I was like, no, thank you.
And you are getting a delight, or trying to instill delight in torturing and captivity. Hostel, that was another one. I saw the first Hostel film. I thought, this is really distasteful. Actually, never bothered to go back to the other. the Human Centipede, I have absolutely big nope. I am never ever going to see that. I do not need to have that mental image in my head. And there are far worse films in this genre, which I'm not going to mention the names of, but there are some what I would consider truly appalling horror films out there, which
Shock
are
films.
just designed to be nasty. I mean, genuinely nasty and vicious and sadistic, and that does not grab me at all.
That's why we all draw healthy boundaries under what
Yeah,
we
that's
will and
where
won't
my
watch.
boundaries in horror films. And I was just going to end on some recent noteworthy horror films which I've watched and gone, yeah, actually this works really well. You've already mentioned the Babadook,
True.
which I just thought worked really well
lacked
as a
certain
horror
something
film.
for me. I watched it and went, it's almost good, but it's just not quite.
No, it struck the right nerve for me. Malignant was another one I watched recently, past few months, and I kind of liked that one. There's something about like it's kind of freaky. I enjoyed Malignant. It Follows. That's another good one that I enjoyed. Again, it's a relentless. You can't get away from it. You can run, but it will catch you. Talking about cultural things, Train to Busan, Korean zombies on a train.
Yeah, we talked
Fucking
about that
brilliant.
in the post-April one.
Yeah.
Being remade as Train to New York, but the original perfect zombie on a train for me. Hereditary is another film which a lot of people kind of raved about. It's all right, but it doesn't necessarily sit high on my list. But there are still some good horror films being produced. Go out and find your favourite horror films. Definitely see The Haunting and see Night of the Demon.
But
two original ones.
the 1963 Haunting, not any
There
other.
is only a 1963 version, just like there's only one Highlander.
Okay, and only 3 Indiana Jones, 4 potentially once I've seen
I enjoyed the
Dark
last
Destiny.
one.
3.5.
And there are only 3 Lord of the Rings
4
films.
lights.
Yep.
There are
And
4 lights.
because it's autumn.
Okay, Picard.
Autumn is a good time to rewatch Lord of the Rings.
So there we are, folks. We have squeezed Mark as hard as we can until all the films that he enjoys as horror came out of him, and compared their changing throughout history to how Halloween exists now. And we've tried to touch on kind of how we see particularly things like the 50s and the 80s affecting this big train of excitement that we have throughout the month of October as we celebrate Margert. But
It's not going to catch on.
Oh, I'm happy. I've said it for 2 whole pods. I've forgotten about it by next night out.
Still not funny.
But that is us for this week. We hope that, as ever, that you enjoyed mostly listening to kind of Mark's thoughts about horror. We've been looking forward to him telling, because it's his passion. It's his passion.
Oh, yes.
And all the other random crap that we came out with today. And that you will join us again next time as we don our hoods of terror. Sorry, Holly, your little eyebrow raise made me laugh. Slip our hands into our soggy gloves of fear and tackle Halloween or Margert across many different countries. Hopefully we will have many guests talk to us about what it's like to celebrate Halloween across the globe, or we'll just make it up. You can try and guess that I'm actually interviewing someone from, let's say, California, when it's actually Mark doing a terrible accent in a cowboy hat. Who knows?
That'd be fun.
It will be a terrible accent, as we have already discovered.
Do you have a cowboy hat?
No.
We'll have to get him a cowboy hat.
Thanks.
Okay, that's us. It's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
That's the power of the fries. Goodbye. Have an amazing week, everyone. Much love. Take care of each other.
Bye.
We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Au revoir. You have been listening to A Geek Tragedy with me, Plague Mantle, and my best friend, the excellent Holly Properly, and our actually famous guy, Mark Caldery. If you like this, there is plenty more at patreon.com/A Geek Tragedy. Production is by Kit Bretnell. Our logo and artwork is by markcaldery.com. Music is by Boleslaw Kozielski. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Geek Tragedy. Email us at geektragedypodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe, leave us a rating and a review. And don't forget to tell all your geeky friends. Also, a big shout out to all of our genius geeks. We adore each and every one of you. And of course, much love. Take care of each other.